So this is the OpenChain Export Control Work Group. We're having our meeting on the 1st of August. This meeting is under the Linux Foundation Antitrust Policy, full policy on the website. If you're from an LF member company, you can direct any questions to our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Now, this meeting is going to be sparsely populated, given that a lot of our contributors are based in Europe, and it's August, which means the continent is currently closed. On the bright side, we have had some progress. So for those of you who are new, maybe you're watching this recording for the first time, we're working on a website conversion. There was an old website called the Crypto Law Survey, and this website was maintained in HTML by one party in the Netherlands, if I recall correctly. Now, this listed country by country open source export control interaction, focusing on export control rules country by country. So what we've done is we've decided to take the website, convert it into Markdown, and make it easier for people to review and edit it. This is happening on GitHub. There's a bunch of issues open on GitHub, assigned mostly to various people, and we've had a few closed since the last call. What I'll do is take us to some of that material. If I can find the right open, window, bear with me. Right. I'll have it in a second. I see. Okay. So here we go. What I'll start off by doing is I'll just show everyone the open issues, and I'll put this into the chat for those who want to. This is now in the chat. These are the open issues. We have a bunch of volunteers working on various parts. For reference, for instance, GS is on holiday. It's a Swiss holiday at the moment, but we have decided to parcel things out to various people. The three issues that are closed, and I'll go through them in sequence, allowing any questions. Issue 14 is the first one we're going to have a look at. And that was about the sources file from the original website, which was in HTML, and Steve has put into an MD file in our repo. Steve, if I understand correctly, this is in MD format, but we have to process it to weed out dead links and so on. Is that correct?
It is, yes. It's got 3 links in it, 2 of which go to 404, not found, and the third link is FTP format, and therefore the markdown on GitHub at least doesn't do anything with that. It doesn't recognize it as a proper link. So it's likely that that third link is also to a dead location. So
okay.
I have opened issue 19 to revise that content.
Perfect. Well, I mean, that seems pretty straightforward. Okay, let's work on that. So that's an open issue to work on. I suppose one thing we should do, rather than simply deleting the dead links, is just put in a notice that the link is no longer functional as a primary source, and just leave it to posterity then.
All right, I can do that in a minute.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
I say that. I mean, I said I would do these things in a minute after the last call. I've only just done them 2 months later, so we'll see. Hush
now. Don't tell anyone our secrets. People watch one video and then the next. It could have been momentary. Right. I'm exactly the same as Steve. In the last hour before this call, we're both closing our issues. So there's this overarching MD file, not a country file, about a Wassenaar agreement. And I was to review the HTML to Markdown. And that's done. The HTML to Markdown, I think, is all correct now. And there were some moments which needed fixing, but nothing in particular. So what I can do now with that closed is lean into some of the other countries and try to tidy up some of those. That'll bring us to another topic in a minute, but let's just go to the final issue that was covered. Oh, my apologies. Did I put issue 15 into the chat? No, I didn't. this is my one, the Wassenaar Agreement, that's closed, if you want to review it. And we're just about to talk about issue 6 now in the chat. Update the README with rules for submissions or edits. Steve correctly flagged this should be a contributors file, and you've added the contributors file. So let's have a look. Boom. Right, looks nice. Do we have a corresponding channel in our Slack workspace? I don't know.
That's a really excellent point. We should mention general communication channels and so on. I don't know about Slack. No.
I don't know. I don't think we have one right now. Actually, our Slack is pretty quiet compared to some other projects' Slack. Most people seem to prefer to have the in-person meetings or the mailing lists. Okay, I'll take an action item to check that. So I'll just open a very quick issue about this.
Yeah, in fairness, I added the additional material. I didn't read too carefully the stuff that was previously there. That's my fault, my bad.
No, not at all. That's actually, the main thing was to get it there. That's done. So there's just a side issue now of going and checking if we've got accurate data. Right. There's a few general things, and I thought that we might want to talk through this one. We currently have a giant blob of countries, and some of them are big countries, and some of them are small countries, and some of them economically are big, and some are tiny. So the question is, with our limited resources of a volunteer group, do we prioritize on countries? And do we, for instance, prioritize by starting with the large blocks or international agreements like EU and Wassenaar? And then do we pick largest economies or similar? And this is an interesting debate. You know, do we prioritize the top largest economies, top 10 largest economies, or do we do something else? Does anyone have opinions about this?
When we discussed this last time, I suggested that we started with the EU and Wassenaar files because many of the other country files reference them, and therefore it would give us more bang for the buck. After that, though, I don't have a preference on whether we start with the ones that are, like you say, largest economies, or whether we knock off the 20 smallest that say practically nothing. But then again, it depends on what we're talking about doing here. Are we talking about reviewing them for formatting correctness and conversion? Or are we talking about reviewing them for updating and revising the substantive content within?
That's a great point. I imagine it's a two-part process. Part one, get the content in shape. Part two, and I'm going to go back to our open issues. We're going to ask Jimmy if the Ericsson export control team can take a look. So perhaps if we do part one, make sure the HTML is easy to read, then we could hand over to external export control experts to check if the content works. That would give us a workflow as follows. Potentially, we check. No, it's not. Okay, so that would potentially be a three-part process. We check the conversion, we hand over to export control experts for review, and then we review the files to improve, I should say, reading logic. So maybe just make sure they're all consistent in how they start and flow, so that people would have the same workflow when they read each file.
Okay, I'd phrase reading logic as something else, because if I read that back in a week's time, I'm not going to know what you mean.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I know. I'll just harmonize as document layout. There we go. And the proposal is, start with EU and WAS. I would like to make a secondary proposal. Then we proceed to my proposal, doesn't have to agree. US, China, Korea, Japan, and India. And once we have those in play, perhaps then we hand over to the export control experts, or we could actually do it. Oh, I don't know. So I suggest that, and then we come back to the other countries. But what does everyone else think?
Okay with the ordering. I'm tempted to add a table to either the README or contributing or something that shows status in terms of different phases.
Yes. Yeah, if we could have a table there, it could be useful. Because right now people have to go into the data file and rummage around. But if the README provided links into it, that would be convenient. And then we can just link back to the README for people to get back to the start of the book, so to say.
Yeah.
Just checking if Archna or Marcel have any comments on this.
I'm still digesting. The point for me, so I love what we're doing here. So as I'm now the representative of also a colleague that is on holiday, so I'm here for the first time directly, and I will check here internally about our export control experts because we have some in the company. But they're not used to community work. So this is potentially where we need to bridge that. But that will be very helpful. So therefore, I cannot make an answer directly here, but for me, it sounds reasonable. What Stephen said with the EU at Wassenaar is everyone refers to this, so that's nice. Then I just had a look into the documents, and I think US would be the perfect next pick because if I just click through this and well, typically it was very short for most of the countries, and then US was you scroll and scroll and scroll. So I think that anyway will keep us busy for a while because this is just the huge amount of the US and I guess the Asian might be similar with Japan, China. So I think there's anyway most of the material, and hopefully we can then reuse the learning from EU, US, so for the smaller ones. So hopefully then also with this experience, the rest would be quicker.
Yep, that sounds good. And you know, just to be clear on what we're asking from export control, we're just asking them to look at this existing material, quick look over, and see if anything's glaringly wrong. So we're not creating a workload to ask them to spend hours on this. This is a rolling reference material. So what we'd like is an expert to glance at it and see if anything hits them as completely nuts at this stage. Because this material is 10 years out of date.
Yeah, I've talked to our internal trade compliance people, and they really struggle to wrap their head around this. You know, their questions were, well, who is the customer we're doing this for? What is the product we're building? No, it's not that. And understandably, because they're focused in particular areas, so they've got key questions they want to ask, none of which apply here because, well, this is for a community project and it's for everybody and everything rather than specific instances.
Yes.
So yeah, I can understand, Marcel, that you'd have some similar conversations and difficulties.
And especially if they think, okay, especially as we're known to automate everything, that they might think that we automate away their job potentially. This information, what could not be wrong potentially in the future, but this is a
don't tell them.
big first step. So therefore, I hope that we can bring this together, right? Because that our organization internal and the community is, because this is not differentiating, right? Everyone has this this problem. So I think there's a big value in collaborating on this.
Maybe one way
Yeah.
to... Sorry, go ahead, Stephen. My apologies.
No, I was agreeing, and as I've said before, my long-term dream for this work is that we end up having something similar to the license compliance tooling support, where we have common understandings and interpretations and so on, and we can apply tooling to the large quantity of open source. Because the difficulty we always have is we talk to our trade compliance people, they say, does any of this code contain any encryption anywhere? And we go, I don't know, we didn't write 90% of it, it's open source. And they struggle with that concept. So I'm hoping that obviously this won't automate away their jobs, but it might mean that we can have more straightforward conversations with them with meaningful information rather than just guessing.
Absolutely. And one of the things here, I think we touched on it in a previous call we did, was the idea that once we have the, let's say, the material, basically the US flags the cutoff point for export control on encryption. So it's pretty clear what to potentially search for in XYZ. And if we mess around with this data for a while and our data is relatively okay as a reference point, it might be a way to quickly do an automatic scan with a filter. You know, this is US, this is China. What's it throwing out to us today? So we have to be, of course, cautious that it's not our burden to guarantee that this corpus is accurate.
Yeah, but even the first hints would be helpful for us.
Yeah.
To detect what are the parameters that we need to observe in our code on the websites, potentially also, because I think intended use is also very important, right? And intended use, typically you don't write in the code. It's somewhere in the collateral material, so that we also need to widen a little bit the horizon of what we're then checking. But then I hope this will be one of the very early outputs that we see an overlap of most of those country requirements. That's okay. You need to deliver this to do this judgment, and then we can in parallel try to also standardize that for our products, for our projects, to say, okay, by default, every project should deliver this information that we can do this matching easily.
And hypothetically, I'm just going to display on this for the audience. So just going to try and grab something from let's go into the US. This is going to be big. Okay, so going into the US, there's lots of text here, which is the data corpus. But then the idea was that when it identifies something, like specifically, we create a tag. And these tags can be read by tooling in the future. This isn't a concrete thing, but it was a proposal that from this corpus of data, perhaps even at the head, we could create a series of tags showing what are the cutoff points, known cutoff point in this country for encryption that's export control covered by, let's say, the EAR regulations. And that would allow your tooling to dive into this corpus, grab that tag, and know that US has this cutoff point for EAR. So the corpus of our material then allows you to go, what's going on here, and see the actual reasoning and so on, which allows your OSPO or similar to, if necessary, brief themselves ahead of talking to export control team and so on and so forth. Or even export control team to spin new people up to speed. One way to flag this to your teams might be to say that basically this is a book. This is for everyone because it's a book. And the book is in a format that will also ultimately, hopefully, allow automation to scan key parts of it and utilize that. Maybe that could be a mental model. Yeah, that's where we're at now. I guess we actually have quite a few open issues. So I don't think at this juncture we should open more issues, but maybe we could say that the country priority is something that maybe we should start running on. And if someone has bandwidth and it's not already assigned to someone else, please consider doing some work on one of the major countries flagged here, like US, China, Japan, Korea, India, or dive into the EU. So that's, I think, our next practical step. What do you think?
Sure.
All right. In that case, I actually think we don't have more to do on this call. I may be wrong, and there is a any other business section, but what do you think?
So I have one question about the priority. Is there anything on which we can decide which country have which priority? Is it any criteria to decide that? Only one point that we have discussed is economical wise, like how populated the country is. Is that a good idea?
We haven't locked down criteria at all, really, except a suggestion to start with EU and WASNAR because they're referenced a lot in other ones, and the US because it's a huge file. But those are very informal criteria. And if you have suggestions or ideas and you want to reprioritize, that's super welcome.
So according to me, like the country who have introduced the export criteria in their country, on that basis, we can decide the priority. Like US have had its first export criteria in 1917. So it's quite early time they have introduced something like that. So maybe US we can put on top priority because they have introduced something that many countries adapt later on. So on the basis of adaptation to the export criteria, we can decide the priority.
If we can identify it, absolutely. It's a valid optic. I mean, our current proposal is listed here, and we can adjust that if you have any preferences or any data points that suggest we should go in a different direction. So all we've identified right now is that a lot of people reference EU. Well, I guess that's because we've got 27 countries plus one escapee with the UK, and WASNAR because it's an international agreement. And then the US simply because it's a huge document. But you know, this list is pretty ad hoc. And if you have another data point, a reason to relist it or a way to organize more countries, excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. I just put in the chat. My suggestion is just add a comment to the issue so it's formally recorded with that data point, and we'll proceed to it. So this is a very flexible situation.
Yeah, okay.
Brilliant. Good feedback.
The other thing I'll mention is not related to this specific work, but when talking to my local folks, one thing they pointed me to was this questionnaire, which I've just stuck in the chat, which comes from the US government. And this apparently is related to classification of things. And it's a whole load of questions, some of which are quite surprisingly detailed, which again could be used to feed into what metadata we consider and things like that when we're looking at the actual texts.
Goodness. Description of all symmetric and asymmetric encryption algorithms, key lengths, and how they're used, including the parameters, inputs, and settings.
Yeah, I mean, what? I don't recall ever being asked about this when we've been shipping products, but then again, maybe I haven't been kept shipping the kind of products that trigger this kind of thing.
Wow. Well, this is obviously a good thing to have. It looks like one of the most comprehensive checklists I've seen. Horrific, therefore useful. So maybe we could add this as an issue to help with restructuring the documents. Goodness. the first thing anyone looking at this will think is that's going to be slow and expensive. Huh.
Certainly painful, yes. And
obvious...
one of the questions I find is early on, it's talking about open source, and it's question 5 actually. Is this source code publicly available, open source, unchanged from the code obtained for an open source website? And one question there is, what do you mean by unchanged?
Yeah. What is encryption source code? Encryption algorithm I can get, but encryption source code, interesting. My goodness, it looks like the export control teams are pretty busy in the background. A lot of phone calls for them to clarify this.
Yeah.
Well,
so our next call will be in 2 months, I think, which would put it after the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit Europe. And we've got a mini summit on the Monday, is that right?
We do, though I am considering rescheduling the mini summit to Thursday. And the reason is SPDX has been placed at the same time as us, and SPDX has a major release. So if we overlap on Monday, we'll fragment their audience and we'll have less participants. It won't benefit either project. Then I need to move independent of the LF event team, and we have options of 17, 19, 20, or 21.
I would appreciate that, Shane, because I already was puzzled. How can I manage this on Monday?
Right. Right. It's a really tough cookie to address. So I suggest then, I don't want to put us on 19 or 20. That's the main body of the conference. Day 3 of the conference is usually pretty quiet. So if we went on morning of 21st, if you'll be around, then we'd be looking at having automation and export control and so on as the topics of a 3-hour mini summit. Would that be potentially suitable, or do you need to be out of town by 21st?
I'll have to check.
Okay.
I will be there until Friday, so I would be there on Thursday.
That'd be good. I mean, we could try 17, but I think a lot of people will be flying in on 17. 18, we have a board meeting of OpenChain in the morning, then SPDX is in the afternoon. I've been working with LF events to try to resolve the conflict, but in a nutshell, they can't put us on a different day. They can only put the mini summits on Monday, and we can't put our one in the morning because we have a board meeting. So I'll target the 21st. We'll have to do it independently of LF events, so we'll pay for our own room and whatnot somewhere else. But I'll ask them to inform all our current mini summit invitees and let them get their refund and know that our mini summit will be free. We'll use the OpenChain event budget for it. Okie dokie. Yeah, good talk. Let's close this meeting and go have coffee or a nice cool drink, depending on where you're located on this little planet. Thank you for everything, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you, you too. See you. Bye.
Bye.